a story that's based on some true events that happened in my life and is something that's just always stuck with me and that I've tried to process by creating in something. But I won't belabor an explanation. I'll just read it for you. So I hope you enjoy it. This is called Corpus, and it goes like this. You and me, we were brothers. We were brothers to our families who first made the joke. We were brothers to the people that we repeated it to like gospel. We were brothers and we knew it like we knew dirt was red, tea was sweet, and mama's love was forever. Twins, born exactly the same from the toes on our flat feet to the tops of our toe heads, only 3 weeks apart, and different parents. But brothers just the same. My mother dreamed your birth like an Old Testament prophet. In a room filled with gauze and light, she saw your mother laid out on a table before a great window. Her hair, Bible black and already ankle long, pooled around her in impossible abundance, spilling over the table edges in ribbons of rilling jet fringe. The light teemed through the glass over her body, and her massive belly glowed full of it. And inside, in shadow, was a butter bean of a little boy with a full head of straw hair and his father's nose. So it was no surprise when she awoke to a ringing telephone heralding your arrival. And it was no more of a surprise when 21 days later a second phone call from your mother presaged that my own emergence was nigh. The day that we first shared a crib, they found us holding hands, and from then on we loved each other with an intensity that belied our blood. We were brothers. Then one day, we were 8, and resting in the porch shade after playing in the yard all morning, I wickedly lifted my bare, dust-caked foot to your face and dared you to kiss it. To my great surprise, you leaned forward and placed your lips on the place my arch should have been and pulled away with a loud smack. And you swore and spat and wiped your lips on the hem of your shirt. And then, with a smile full of the devil, you dared me in turn to kiss the neighbor's monstrous, foul-tempered German shepherd square on his black, wet nose. That dog's name was Bear. Later, at the emergency room, that fact caused a small ruckus among the nurses. Oh, what bit you? Only 7 stitches that day, but a permanent sneer of a scar for the rest of them that I've had to drape behind a mustache since my first wisps of hair. I never blamed you, though. I never blamed you for anything. The mouthful of wasps, the pellet in my leg, the little knot on my occipital bone, yellow pine branch under my kneecap, the green slivers of Coke bottle in my eye, they're trophies, souvenirs, the inheritance bequeathed to us by our past. The sons, and often also the daughters, of the pissant towns of the backwater South bear a particular sort of willfully arrogant ignorance towards gravity and its consequences. Colloided limbs flailing, bursa snapping like bubble gum, shattered wrecks of smiles under retinas flapping like window shades, we toss our tender selves into and against and through our fragile youth. Most of those fortunate enough to reach maturity have X-ray road maps with hairline filigree to trace the journey. It is a drive so deep it's almost genetic, to not simply ascend to the peak of the steep roof, but to then, hammer in hand, dance on the rain-slicked shingles. It was, in fact, that same spirit, that celebration of unfettered physicality, that we were honoring 3 years after that day, when your mother discovered us naked in my bedroom. We'd had enough that day of the beating from the summer sun and had retreated to my room at the back of the house, where the trees hung thicker. After pulling blinds and cutting lights, we punched the old window unit awake and teased its buttons and knobs until it growled and spat on the carpet. It wheezed and sliced the soupy air with ice, and we peeled out of our sopping shorts and wrestled for prime seating. We cackled at the farting sound the beanbag chair made against our bare butts. We summoned glorious flatulent croaks from our armpits when our chilled, drying rumps failed to produce them any longer, and then sniffed at our fingers for the new salty smell we found there. Finally, tiring of the curious silliness of being in bodies that had odors and made noises, we draped sheet capes over our shoulders, and we watched the great space coaster at high volume while rubbing our goose-pimpled arms in the cooling air, cheek by cheek on the floor. When your mother cracked the door to call us to lunch, that's how she found us. Is it time and age, or the terror of that moment and the shock of what followed that colors my memory of her gasp? In my mind, it seems impossibly, inhumanly loud and long for a single breath, even one powerful enough to pull all the joy from that room with it. The door crashed open as she descended upon us, and we scattered. Catching you in her fist, her carefully coiled bun shook as she fought to hold you, and then exploded into a curtain of black that twitched and reared around you both in the flickering half-light from the television. I couldn't make sense of the dark, undulating shape of your struggle. As you lurched and reared closer to where I cowered, I tensed, ready to break and run. And then some part of your confusion of limbs caught the edge of the blind and tore them, clattering from the window. Uncaged, the sun pounced through the glass and wrapped itself around you, setting you on fire. The sudden light struck me like a bolt that took my sense and pinned me to the spot. As my eyes adjusted, I knelt on the floor in a panic fugue and watched while she broke her hand, beating you in front of me. My stomach rolled. You squealed and pleaded the unjust violence like this did not happen in my home, and I hung transfixed between indignation and the impotence of being a good boy. You hung from her fist by your elbow, dancing on your toes as you hopped and twisted away from her blows. She swatted in time to a howling chant, punctuating each connection with a word. Jesus does not like that. Jesus does not like that. On and on and on. I had looked at your body almost as often and as curiously as I had looked at my own. I had curled against it in sleep, bathed with it, embraced it, marked it, laid innocent hands and eyes on it in 1,000 ways. And now, in the alchemy of fear and outrage and confusion, this strike of radiance sparked inside me, and for the first time I saw something new. I saw how the summer sun had baked you, lean and brown as the lizards under the porch, all dry, whip-quick angles. I saw how you had condensed, and under a residual layer of baby fat showed the first signs of powerful arches and sweeping valleys to come. I saw as my eyes swept up the tense comma of your torso, the ladder of your ribs, and the gentle peaks at your chest across the widening triangle of your back, and up your arm to your wrist, where your mother's hand gripped it like knotted rope. I saw the cruel cables in her arms tensed to the sharp peak of her shoulders as they pulled the thin fabric of her nightgown and rose under her skin like breaching whales. I saw down the hard, crooked branch of her other arm, and how the offending hand opened and bent back on itself against the resistance of the air as she whipped it at your skin, full circle as she made contact again and again, the press and jiggle of your flesh and the pink ghosts of fingers blurring into welts of red. I saw, even in that moment of ugly ignorance, how gracefully the knots on her knuckles swept down into the cords and hollows of her wrists, to the dancing slopes and crests of her forearms. I saw the crimson twist of your ear diminish at its lobe to a trail of freckles turning back around your neck to disperse across your shoulder like a dusky sky of dark stars. I saw the hard little crab apples at her jaw anchoring the flat sails, framing the soft hollow of her throat. I saw the balance and pull of tendons taut as D-strings where your calves pushed your feet into arcs below and pulled open the secret smile at the cups of your knees. She stopped with a final guttural cry, and the curl of your body hung from her, tense with pain and shame, but submissive and resigned. I took you in, blissed with terror, and the tableau brought to my mind a picture in a book, terrible, beautiful, and luminous light that I half remembered from a room that smelled like butter cookies and crayons and tweed hot from a sunny window. I let out a gasp of my own, I think, and I said something like, "Oh," while inside I was crying, "Oh, do you see? Do you see?" If I had known then that it was a question I'd be asking the rest of my life, known that the line of bodies down the thread of my days would all connect back to this revelation, that every blush and ecstatic sigh, every bit of flesh I took on or around or into my own was a passionate communion with this moment of pain, I might have said it out loud. You would not look at me, but I couldn't turn away from your hot from crying face. I longed and despaired for you to meet my eyes. I ached to snatch at your retreat, to pull you back to me with my gaze, and with every nuance I could conjure in it say, "I see you. I know you. I love you." But if you had looked, I wonder, would you have seen instead only where I had broken open, where plates shifting along my mantle had sent new oceans surging between us? I know you never forgave me for escaping my own beating. When she released you, she declined to spank me, turned up her nose like I was too filthy to touch, though I could see her holding her hand behind her back as her adrenaline passed away into blooming pain. Instead, she told him that my parents would take care of me when they got home. We all knew better, of course. My parents were tacit nudists. They had no particular philosophy on the topic other than the practical notion that clothing was mostly a social nicety. After crossing one's own threshold, it could be cast off as though on fire. Don't get me wrong, we were decent people, just not above answering the door in our underwear. My mother, having no place in her home for the kind of shame that yours craved, just called her an ignorant fool. You, though, did you blame me? Did you remember that it was my idea? We never ever said a word about it between us, or even acknowledged that it happened, except that from that day you would not even wear shorts, or so much as take off your shoes in front of me. And how could I answer to that? With a mouth that still felt the chill of the cheek, frosted in the TV light, that I had laid a quick, dry kiss on only seconds before that door flew open. And then the summer ended. Not long after, our father's business and their friendship and their respective marriages fell apart. And then, one day, I found myself kneeling against the hot back seat of our silver-blue Pontiac Bonneville, peering through the rear window at a yellow-gold Cadillac. And beyond that other window was a boy, who I could barely see through the reflection of the sky on the glass. But I knew that he knelt too, staring back at me. He raised his hand, and I waggled mine so hard that my wrist popped, and the taffy soft highway tugged at our tires as we pulled apart, and I watched until the heat shimmer rippled up over him and squeezed him flat, smeared him into the Mississippi blacktop. 30 years on, and there are still U-shaped holes in me. Their edges are softer, vaguer now, where time and my poking fingers have eaten at them. But what remains? What always will remain is the solid press of hard-packed ground under my heels and red dust in my toes, the gamey smell of bear's food on his breath, and the feel of your lips on the sole of my foot, and how even after the all-day sting of the sun-baked clay, they had burned there. So that's Corpus.